Welcome to Barnyard Language, honest talk about running farms and raising families. We are Katie and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer, with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us.
While this is a podcast for farm families, sometimes our content isn't for the whole family. So kick off your boots, reheat your coffee, and join us for some Barnyard Language.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Barnyard Language. We're hanging out on the farms in Iowa and Ontario. So, Katie, what's happening on your farm these days?
Not a whole hell of a lot. We're in that mid-late winter, early late winter. I don't know. Not spring.
You can't really predict it. You never know when the winter's actually going to end, despite what the groundhogs tell us.
Yeah, firmly not spring. But that part of winter where spring starts to seem like something that might happen again, you know.
The days are getting a little longer, so there's some sense of hope that something's happening.
Yeah, and the first day of lambing is visible in next month's calendar and, kind of thinking about it. So we're just getting some work done for that, getting lamb building set up. I need to go set my security cameras back up and everything. I went away for the weekend with some friends, went on a little girls knitting retreat / crochet retreat / ate way too much retreat up to Lake Pepin, Wisconsin, which is actually not a lake. It's a wide spot in the Mississippi, but it's a beautiful area. And we rented an Airbnb that's, somebody's grandma's farmhouse. And it was lovely. It was nice to just get away a bit and, eat meals while they were still hot. And nobody asked me to get them anything, beyond like, you were already up and literally standing next to the thing. Could you hand it?
Right. Yeah. Can you grab that thing because I'm over here knitting and I don't want to stand up.
As opposed to, I am sitting here on the couch next to you with 2 perfectly good hands and 2 perfectly good legs, but also can you go get me that thing?
Slightly different.
Which is very different.
Did you complete any projects while you're away? How many did you bring with you?
I did message said friends before we left and told them that if any of them was because I've heard these people exist, I will start this one project, finish this one project, think about the next project, buy yarn only for that project, and then do that project. People, they weren't allowed to come. Between the 4 of us, we completely filled the back of my car with food and yarn. I drive a Ford Explorer. The third row seat was down. I didn't complete any. I read a book. We all kind of fussed with a lot of stuff. 2 of my friends made hats. One of them made a whole colorwork hat in one day, which is insane. A lot of talking got done. A lot of eating. And a lot of playing with yarn. So
those are all good things.
It was a lovely time. Very relaxing.
I know that as a parent, and sometimes especially as a mother, it's not always that easy to prioritize your own time and own getaways. So that's good. Good for you for making it a priority and making it happen with your friends.
I'm trying to make a real point of prioritizing it at least occasionally so that A, I don't get caught in that inertia of never doing anything, and B, so my kids grow up thinking that it's right and appropriate and normal for both parents, to have their own lives outside of having kids, especially when you farm. So how are things at your place, Arlene?
Well, they're okay. The farm is good. Cows are milking. We have a little bit of a baby boom at the moment and have had quite a few calves the last little while. So the calf barn is filling up. I'm actually part of a crafting group as well. Katie and I really know how to party. So my crafting group is kind of more of a once a month usually. Sometimes it stretches out a little bit further when stuff comes up and people end up having to cancel. But yeah, so the location changes depending on the month. But my crafting group met last weekend, so that was lovely. So I bring my cross stitching and work away on that. But yeah, plans changed for the past week for what I thought I was going to do and what I ended up doing. I think I've mentioned before, I'm firmly in the sandwich generation with both kids and parents who sometimes have some health struggles. So my dad is currently in one of those phases where he's having some health struggles. So I've spent a little bit more time at the hospital the last over the weekend and the last few days than most people would like, but it was where I wanted to be and was there to hang out with my mom and learn lots about medicine and the medical system and the human body that I didn't know I needed to know or will probably forget again. It's confusing because you don't always know the questions to ask or what they're always talking about. And not to say that the staff hasn't been fantastic, because they are. But yeah, it's confusing to try and figure out all the things that are going on, and especially in someone who has had other health complications and has had, heart surgery and those types of things. So there's lots of different things that could go wrong and have been somewhat going wrong. But, we've got hope that things are going to get better. And yeah, but it looks like he's got a long road of recovery ahead of him. So yeah, that's been my last few days. So it's been interesting, but we have amazing help here at home, and having older kids means that it's not quite as difficult as it used to be to just say, okay, I gotta go. And, I gotta pack a bag and see what happens in the next few days. So it was good that I was able to do that.
Yeah, it does feel like with kids and, younger folks, at least, if you're lucky, like there's medical stuff, but it's of the sort of broken arm, strep throat variety. And obviously, young people are just as capable of getting really sick and having, really serious health problems. But knock on wood, at least, for our family, the kids have only dealt with pretty straightforward medical stuff where, you break your arm, you set it, hopefully it just heals up. Like it's not a real touch and go thing.
Yeah, you wait for that one thing to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the older you get and the more complex your medical needs get, the more complex things are.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, when the medication list becomes a list, that's then you're in new territory.
Yep.
Anyway, that's what we were up to. I also wanted to mention that not every year, but for a couple of years, we have tried to incorporate our husbands into our Valentine's Day episode, and that's just not going to happen this year. So we'll extend our love to Jim and Hugh, despite the fact that we're not going to have them on for Valentine's Day, but maybe next year. But we do have for this week's episode a flower farmer, so that seems appropriate for Valentine's Day. So we hope you enjoy our episode and interview with her.
Sounds good.
Today, we are excited to be talking to Akos Asare, who is joining us from Ontario, like me. And we start each of our interviews with the exact same question. So this is always a way for our guests to introduce themselves. So we always ask, what are you growing? Which for our farmers usually covers some crops and livestock, potentially, but also covers businesses and kids and all that kind of stuff. So Akos, what are you growing?
So what are we growing? Well, last in 2024, we kind of transitioned a little bit. We used to always grow veggies for market. Now we're mostly focusing on growing veggies just for our family. So we kind of grow as much as we can to get us through the year. But we also grow cut flowers, and with the flowers, we actually sell those. So
That sounds beautiful and delicious. And are you also growing some kids?
yes, I'm growing two children, and they're, oh boy, I should know this immediately. They are 6 and 4. Yeah, so grade 2 in kindergarten.
Yes, those are busy ages. So with farmers, we're often talking about kind of scale and, types of crops and all that kind of stuff. So can you tell our listeners, for context, kind of what space you're using to grow your flowers and what types of things you can grow in the climate that you're in?
Yeah, so we run an urban farm, Re.Planted urban farm and floral studio. We grow cut flowers, and then including our veggies as well, what we grow for ourselves. We're about 3,000 square feet. So I put that into Google the other day, and I think it's like 0.06 of an acre. I don't know what the fraction is of that, but it's a very, very small amount of space, and we're actually utilizing 3 underutilized front lawns. So we're a network of lawns that we've converted into no-till, organic, regenerative gardens. And so that consists of my neighbor's lawn, mine, which we're fortunate it's kind of two in one because we're on a corner lot. So we kind of get, both sides. And then actually what's technically town property across the street that they weren't really doing anything with. So we kind of traded, hey, we'll mow that corner and keep it nice and tidy for you if you let me put some flowers on there. So yeah, that's kind of our space and what we're working with. Very very little space.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how different people are using ground in lots of different ways. So, as a parent, I'm just going to ask the question. So, how do you keep your kids from trampling your flowers?
Oh boy. So my youngest, she was so we do have very clear paths in our gardens. The way our gardens are set is there's the beds and then there's like wood chip paths. But when the plants are young, especially my youngest, she had a hard time figuring out what is a plant because what she knows as a plant is a much larger thing that's actually even taller than her. But here you see these tiny little seedlings. So like if she was in one part of the garden and she wanted to get to another, she just like book it straight through. Like she wouldn't go around and so it definitely took a lot of no, go around and all that so that she could learn to navigate around. Now they're good. Even my neighbor's cats, funny enough, I've managed to train them to not go through the beds, go on the paths. I always see them weaving through the paths, and I just think it's so hilarious that they adhere to the boundaries of the beds.
I'm really gonna need some help with training. Maybe sounds like maybe that's like a an online course you could offer because
Yeah. Okay, so it training slash yelling is my methodology.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good
I think
confirmation.
I the way I said it, I made it sound like this like very patient progress, step by step of oh no go around no it's more like
Yeah,
no I said don't go.
or you only had to say it once.
Yeah, no yeah exactly.
it's I put in raised beds last year that are 24 inches high and now consistently find the dog in my raised beds as well as the chickens and my children and
Yeah, you'd think that's a fairly clear boundary too, right? That-
I know, yeah, I know.
apparently it's more of an invitation if it's really clearly laid out as to where things are.
Yeah. It helps that our we don't really have like I guess a standard garden or standard front yard might have like a cement path or whatever. We don't have any cement paths or stone pathways. It's all grass. So really, when you look at it, it looks like the whole front yard is a garden, even though there's specific sections that I'm growing on. So they technically can trample through the garden, just like not in this section. So I guess that helps them to release, their juices of destruction.
Have your kids hit the obsessively wanting to be helpful stage yet?
In some areas, not. I think I've forced them to weed enough times that they're like, let's not even tempt her with.
yeah, don't look interested at all.
Yeah, exactly. But when it comes to certain things, they are very very interested in. As long as it's like clear, we will not be weeding after this.
Yeah, maybe that's just the punishment that needs to be enforced for anyone who goes through the beds is enforced weeding. I don't know how I would get the dog to enforce weed, but she's an Australian Shepherd, so she could figure it out, I bet.
I want weeding to be like a positive experience for them. I want it to be like, a nice day, a fun day. I try and like put music on and we sing and I want it to be a fun experience for them. I mean, after 10 minutes it's not, but I try not to make it a punishment because I really do want them to enjoy it one day, just being outside and just pulling some weeds just for fun.
So, how did you get into agriculture? What led to that? Because my thought is that this is not your first career or where you started out. And what was the first thing that you grew?
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. And I don't have an agricultural background whatsoever. I grew up in the concrete jungle of Toronto, and I actually always lived in apartment buildings, so I didn't even have a backyard, to touch grass. There was nothing. But once I got to university, I took the sustainability course, and that was kind of like the first tiptoe into this kind of world of a more sustainable alternative to life. Um, the course was about something just sustainable business. I have a business degree, so that's what they were talking about. But it was specifically a video that we watched, two videos. One that compared the nutrients of an apple today. So they said one apple, the nutrients of an apple 50 years ago is equivalent to 10 apples today. That's just how eroded our soils are, how little nutrients are, in the soil, and just how much work has to go into making the equivalent. And then there was another video, it was a TED talk that was focusing on fisheries and just the unsustainability of some of these like farmed fisheries, and it just opened my eyes. The truth is, I had the knowledge now, but I didn't have any. I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't empowered to do anything about it, and so I kind of just stored the knowledge up. And as a student on a limited budget, I tried to eat a little bit better and do what I could, but I couldn't really do much in my situation. So it wasn't until I got married and we moved into our first house that we rented a community garden plot. And I grew peppers, lettuce, and carrots and beans. And I grew them all very poorly. Every single thing. The lettuce went to seed. I didn't even know what that meant. It going to seed. It just kept getting taller and taller and taller. And I was like, this is such a weird, I guess maybe this is how lettuce grows. I had no reference.
Yeah, doesn't look like the grocery store. Yeah.
No, not at all. And it tasted terrible because now I know it had gone to seed. And then the peppers, we didn't even start them early. I think I just put the seeds in the garden, so obviously we didn't get anything. We got a couple carrots; they weren't bad, but it was terrible. It was a terrible garden. I didn't know what I was doing at all. And then it wasn't until I continued gardening though, just for fun, and it was clear that I was never gonna harvest anything substantial from this amount of space. But it wasn't until COVID that I kind of fell into a we got a new house and we were able to have our gardens on our own property and have a little bit more of established garden. So I started kind of into to getting into gardening, and I stumbled upon this video online of this guy in LA he called himself, or they called him, the gangster gardener. And I was like, this is a combination of words that I would never expect. And he was doing a masterclass, like on masterclass, like the official website, on how to learn to garden. So I took his master class and I thought it was amazing. He's using, the islands on in neighborhoods, those like little strips of grass between the sidewalk and the road. He had gotten the city of LA to allow him to grow food on those little strips. And I thought it was amazing just what he was doing in his communities. And then from there, I stumbled upon this guy in Florida called Rob Greenfield, and he took on a challenge of only eating the food he grows for a whole year. And he was just bartering people's front lawns to utilize the space to grow all this food. And so suddenly I started to I was slowly getting kind of changing my definition of what it looks like to grow in an urban space and how much you can actually get out of small spaces. And then I saw a video from Curtis Stone. He's out in BC, and he has a farm that is also a network of front lawns called Urban Acres. And again, same thing, but he's growing for market. And then Charles Dowding in the UK, and he is doing no dig and all this on just a quarter of an acre, I believe. And so just all that like rabbit hole of YouTube just totally revolutionized the way that I viewed farming and small spaces and what could be done. And here I was sitting on this corner lot. I was very fortunate. And so I was like, I want to try this. I just want to see what I can get out of this space that I have. And so I literally grew everything, every single thing I could grow. It was chaotic and it was so fun. There was a lot of things. I read so many books to make sure that I, was gonna do a good job. But yeah, that first official year of Re.Planted, that was our first year of Re.Planted, and yeah, I grew everything, absolutely everything. I went through all the seed catalogs. I bought way more seed than I actually could plant, and yeah, it was amazing.
Everyone has an origin story, but some stories hit you in the heart, and the story behind one of our past guests is totally one of those. It all started with a young kid named Kawani.
Yeah, Sean, the chicken guy short of Blooming Health Farms, didn't know he'd be a chicken farmer or that he'd be teaching you how to turn your flock into a business. It began with Kawani, a kid stuck in the court system who needed a second chance. He joined Sean at Blooming Health Farms to turn his life around.
One day, Sean showed Kawani how to sell fresh eggs at a local market. As Kawani started selling those eggs, Sean saw the real power in what he was doing. It wasn't just about the eggs. He was building skills and getting respect from the community. That one small act of selling eggs transformed his life.
And that's how Blooming Health Farms was born. Sean saw that selling eggs could be more than food, it could be a way to help others learn business skills and build their own futures. And now, through their online community called Pimp Your Flock, Blooming Health Farms is taking this mission even further.
Pimp Your Flock is a community for people who want to turn their passion for chickens into profits. You'll learn how to turn your flock into a real income source, and when you join, you're supporting Blooming Health Farms so they can help more kids like Kawani build a better future.
So if you're looking for a way to turn your flock into a business and be part of something bigger, join Pimp Your Flock at pimpyourflock.com. Not only will you learn the skills to make your egg business grow, but you'll also be part of a community that's changing lives.
Head over to pimpyourflock.com today and let's make an impact together, one egg at a time.
So did your spouse, I feel like this is always an interesting one where people either come into farming before they're married or like they're both interested, or if it's something that happens like after marriage. Did your spouse have any warning that this was going to happen, or were you like, I am a city person, I hate dirt, and then like I picture like the moment you got home from your honeymoon or like from your wedding or whatever, that you're like overalls on, work gloves on, ripping out the yard?
You know what? I think it was a slow transition because, like, I remember when I had my son, I love the city. I will live and die in the city. I hated being outside. It was too hot or too cold. Why would anyone want to be outside when you can be inside? It's air conditioning, there's heater, like just all the comforts. I was that person. But again, slowly I was realizing that, maybe there's a better way to live, a way that's a little bit more holistic. And so that started with my son. I think that's when I really, really started to think a little bit more. And it was my decision to get a midwife as opposed to like a traditional OBGYN, that I think my husband started to slowly see that, okay, this person is a little bit quirky, she's a little bit. And so when we started with the garden, and then I wanted to homeschool the kids, which we ultimately didn't do. And then, the growing for sale though, to this extent, I don't think anyone saw that coming. I don't think anyone, even me, if someone told me this is what I would be doing, even then, when I was, getting into it slowly, into gardening, I do not think anyone would have foreseen it becoming what it is now with this, full operation of an urban flower farm.
So that transition then from growing some vegetables and getting really passionate about it to then realizing, was that kind of a, oh my gosh, I've grown way too much here and now I need to start selling it or I'm going to waste it? Or like you said, you have a business background. Was it also your business mind being like, all right, this is something I can do and now this is going to be my career or my business?
Yeah, so it was more the business mind. I planned on, it was COVID, I thought the world was ending. So I was going to grow all of our food and then we would take it to the end, like we would make it through whatever was coming, this apocalypse. That was the plan. But then I thought, well, I have all this space. Maybe if I dedicate a small section to growing, I actually knew a girl who had a restaurant. And so I reached out to her and I'm like, if I dedicate a small section to growing for your restaurant, would you be interested in some veggies? So that was actually the plan. I was mainly going to grow for myself, but I realized this is a very expensive hobby. Maybe there's a way that I can offset the cost a little bit. And I actually ended up not even selling to her. Her restaurant didn't open that year because they had to do so many renovations. And so I did end up with this glut by July of things that I couldn't really store, like lettuce and stuff like that needed to be eaten fresh. And so I had planned on doing a pop-up shop somewhere, but then they canceled it because of the weather. And so then I had an even larger glut because I'd saved all these veggies for then. And my husband was like, why don't you just set up a table on the front lawn and, I don't know, put up a tent and see who comes, just post it on Facebook. And I was like, why would anybody come to my house to buy veggies? This is ridiculous, terrible idea. And then my neighbor was like, no, I actually think this is a good idea. And then I was like, well, you know what? Since you said it, I'll try it. So then I tried it and it was It was ridiculous the amount of people that came. The lineup was insane. Everything sold, and that cemented it for me. And so that first year, that was actually midsummer, so I continued doing the markets for the rest of that season. But because I hadn't planned to do markets, my veggies were inconsistent. So that fall, I buckled down and I said, okay, I'm actually gonna like plan now, plan to plant to sell, and we're actually gonna put plans together. We're gonna learn how to not just grow for myself, but I'm gonna learn to grow to sell. So I took the Market Gardener. I read the Market Gardener book and I took the Market Gardener masterclass, and then I went into the Floret flower farming course as well. And with those two, then I had the actual knowledge and know how to like actually grow high quality items, how to keep it, store it, market it, package it, and then sell it, and then the rest was history.
Yeah, and there you are.
I just want to put in a plug for the fact that lettuce is the worst vegetable because there is no way to keep it.
I agree. I'm with you on that.
Spinach you can freeze, kale you can freeze, like everything. I can't. I'm sure there are other things, but it is very, very hard to think of a vegetable that cannot be preserved in some way, except lettuce. And to get back to your point about bolted lettuce is the most bizarre, horrible tasting. You wouldn't even know it was lettuce if you hadn't seen the whole process thing. I mean, not that I've ever let any lettuce go to seed, but I've heard from other people that this is true. Um, no, my guinea pigs wouldn't even eat the romaine lettuce that I grew them this year, even before it bolted. Like I was buying lettuce for my guinea pigs all summer, despite having a garden full of it.
But you know what's funny? I was watching some random video. I watched some random videos about the history of lettuce. I don't know why. And they were talking about how the ancient Egyptians used it, and they actually and the ancient Greeks how they use lettuce, and they use it at the bolted stage. That was when they used it. It was something they'd eat after a meal because at that stage it helps you to sleep. It helps with digestion, and there's a lot more of a concentration of certain nutrients once it's starting to go to seed. And I thought that was so interesting that that's how they use it. So we're using it very differently from them. And I think at that more mature stage, the use case for it is very different, and you might actually be able to preserve it in a way that's a little bit that's more similar to like cabbage compared to us with the way we use it so young.
Might have to add a lot of herbs and spices to make it palatable, though. There's maybe something that we're missing out on.
Yeah, and I think they also had a palate for more bitter things too. It was almost used as a palate cleanser. Like they'd have the meal and then this would be it to end. And it would just be to like relax everyone because it has that effect of making you kind of drowsy. So in case you can't sleep and you happen to have let your lettuce bolt,
Go chew on some.
yeah, yeah.
It kind of feels like the weeding maybe that if your choice is to eat more bolted lettuce or to go to bed, like maybe it's just easier to go to bed. Maybe you're better off just giving up. Um, I find it fascinating too what you're talking about learning all this from internet classes because I feel like there's a lot of backlash against the internet and there's definitely some downsides. And I hear a fair amount in crafting circles and in farming circles and that about, you should be learning from real people and not the internet. But like, how many urban farmers are you finding on your front lawn? Like, it's even in rural Iowa, it's hard to just get this information from people. And so
And we should also be paying people for their expertise. I mean, it's fine to have a mentor, and I think that's great in theory. But like you said, the people are not always around the block, and there's less of us growing food, and there's in some senses a lot less of us doing crafting or whatever, like those niche skills. Like, why not pay someone on the internet who has the skills that we want, pay them for their skills, and learn from them. I mean, they're still your mentor, even if you don't actually, even if you haven't actually met them in real life.
I think that there's such a one of the benefits of technology is that I can learn from someone in a different country. And there's so much wisdom in the way people do things in a different location that you may never discover, or may be totally lost if that person didn't have the opportunity to share to a broad audience. But I do agree, there has been some people who've kind of taken advantage of the benefits of technology. And, they are not doing it in the most scrupulous ways, this online learning. I think it should be a combination, because I've done both in person and online courses. I think that there's online can only take you so far. Do the preliminary, get the foundations. Definitely go out there and actually apply that knowledge. But if you want to really get advanced in your skill, I do think there has to come a point where you got to get in your car and go to that person. I took a in-person floral workshop. It was a 2-day workshop, not this past season, but the season before, and it was transformational. I've seen online, how to make a spiral bouquet, whatever, but like being there, having this person look at my fingers and tell me your pinky is positioned wrong, move it this way, you just are not going to get that online. And so I think that really, to master your craft, you need to get in person. It's great for you to, kind of test the waters, learn some of the foundations, especially if you're totally brand new. But you got to go in person at some point to really, really master it.
So, one thing I'm wondering, as someone who takes a lot of online classes because rural Iowa and little kids, um, what was your process like for discerning, especially as a beginner to something, what online resources were worth it? Because some of them are very expensive, and sometimes that is totally worth it, and sometimes it's not. Um, your process for discerning who was totally full of shit and who was worth listening to.
Yeah, so price is an indicator. For example, I think like Coursera or one of those like franchise, they have just a bunch of classes, different topics. They were doing like floral arranging course. I think it was like $50, and I did take it. It was cheap enough that I went through it, and I thought it was okay. I mean, it was nice to see. It was more entertainment value. I don't think I could have learned much from it, but because it was so cheap, I didn't feel like I was at such a loss. It was like, okay, nice to see this technique. Um, but when it comes to some more expensive courses, so like the Floret course is 2,000 US, for example. You have to look at the reputation of this person. She is also like very generous with information, even though she has this course. When you go on her website, she has so many free resources, and through those free resources, you can validate her knowledge. This person really knows what they're talking about. They're not gatekeeping. They're not saying, okay, come, like you see these ads sometimes where it's like join the Zoom call and find out more about this, and they pretty much say nothing. And then in that Zoom call, then they tell you to come to another one and you'll learn more about this. It's like, okay, you've given me no information here. There's no credibility, so that I know if you're legitimate or not. And also look at their history. So using Floret again, Erin Benzakein is her name, the woman that owns Floret Flower Farm. She's been farming for now 25 years. I believe actually more than that. So she also has a lot, she spent a long time in this industry. There was some controversy recently about this sourdough bakery, this micro bakery that popped up on Instagram and TikTok. She has been operating for 4 months, and she's already selling a $500 course. And people, fortunately, were digging in and realized, hey, you've only been doing this for 4 months. How are you selling this course for $500? And so I'm glad that people were a little bit, like willing to investigate and actually question it, because she looked amazing on Instagram. Her Instagram presence is beautiful. Looks like she's doing a very good job, but there's not the experience, the history is there's nothing to back that up. So definitely research these people, see what their history is in the industry. I don't want to learn from someone who isn't an industry professional. I don't want to learn from someone who just came off the street. I want someone who's been in the industry for 20 plus years. The market gardener, for example, is Jean Martin Fortier. He's had 3 farms, 3 market farms are still operating. They're still open. They haven't closed. And he's been farming pretty much his entire adult life. And so that is tangible, that's credible, that I can really trust that information and know that this person isn't just talking from, the side of their ass. They're like they're legitimate. They really are. They know their craft.
I know in the online crafting space, there was a post recently from someone's Instagram who was selling an online course to teach people to sew and to, in the same course, help them launch their pattern teaching business, to help them to launch their own online business, teaching people to create patterns when they themselves have just learned to sew.
That's a huge red flag.
Yeah, it's like the MLM of online courses.
Yeah, I'm like, "Do you have a timeshare to sell me too?" 'Cause
No, seriously, that's exactly what this sourdough micro bakery was doing as well. So she was going to be teaching, and people kind of saw through it. She would be teaching you how to start your own online course after, being on Instagram
Yeah.
for 6 months. Yeah, very very interesting people that are starting online courses now. And another one in the flower farming community too. A lot of people who don't have the experience who are selling courses. That I think it's noble. It's a noble cause to want to share knowledge. But again, I also think that especially if people are going to be paying, there needs to be a track record, a proven track record of, when we took the Florette course, she was able to show us, like, in her first 5 years, she made all these mistakes. Then year 5 to 10, she thought she had gotten it, but then she was making these mistakes. And so it's like you have all these years of learning and knowledge to say, okay, I have made all these mistakes. I want to pass that on to you. It's just life. It's just a matter of time. You cannot have made enough mistakes and master your craft in 4 or 5 years, in 2 or 3 years, so that you can pass that knowledge on. So maybe until then, there has to be a little bit more of a willingness to share that knowledge for free. And then maybe later on, 20 years, when you've really, cemented that knowledge, then sell me a $500 course.
I think that's a really interesting point too, because I very much prefer to only learn from people who will admit to their mistakes, because either if you will never admit to a mistake, it means that you don't realize you made mistakes, and I guarantee you did, and you just didn't know that they were mistakes, or you're unwilling to admit to it. And that doesn't come from a place of trust or community if you're going to refuse to tell me anything you did wrong, because then how am I going to be honest with you about things I've done wrong? And it's, I want to hear from the people. And like, I'm a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa, and part of their thing is, they'll have this annual conference, and it's guys who've been, farming soybeans for 50, 60 years, and they'll come in and just a list of things that went wrong this year and mistakes they made. And those are the people I want to learn from, because they're still trying to improve, and they're willing to be honest and to listen to other people about how to do that.
It's true. How can you teach me what to do if, for example, my neighbor, she recently taught me how to make sourdough. And she was telling me, if you accidentally put too much water, here's how to do it. You know why? Because she's accidentally put too much water. Like, how can you foresee that and coach me through these techniques, things that I troubleshoot, through things I might encounter, if you're unwilling to admit that you've gone through this, or you don't have the experience to have even gone through it yet. It just doesn't hold water in terms of, like, value of the knowledge you're passing on. So I do think it's so important to give yourself time to make those mistakes, learn from them, and then not and then pass them on, because you can still pass on information. But, like, again, we're talking about, like, passing on knowledge and asking someone to pay for that, to have that exchange. There needs to be a step by step process before we can get there, where your knowledge is worth money to, to trade.
So, if we're talking about workshops, you're also starting to do some workshops on your farm. Can you tell us about the types of things that you are teaching people, how you're sharing your knowledge, what format it's taking, if they're in person or virtual or
Yeah, so they're all in person. One of the things that post COVID I realized is there was really just a desire for that, touch, that in-person connection, face to face. We were already a very individualistic society, and I think that got worse. I think a lot of groups were isolated during COVID, and just bringing people back together. So that's crucial for me. Everything I do is in person. It does mean that there has to be some travel involved, and it is kind of restricted to those that are local. but I'm always happy to share other flower farms in different areas that have workshops going on so that people can join those, because that in-person connection is just unbeatable. So we do a variety of different things, and it's all very experiential. For me, it's every single workshop. My goal is for people to come and just to forget about the troubles in their lives, the things that are going on around the world for just a moment. I like to call it a moment of respite, just a haven of respite. So you come, you're totally, completely involved. Your mind is completely consumed with what we're doing, the activity, the food, the people, the conversation. And then you walk away on cloud nine, even if it's just for a day, 24 hours, just that moment of just escaping from the everyday. That's the goal of all the workshops. So we do a variety. We have some food focused ones. Even though we're not growing veggies to sell anymore, we'll still be doing the food focused ones. So we have a farm to fork. We also have a grow your groceries masterclass. And so that's just kind of a personal passion of mine to grow my own, as much of my own food as possible, sharing that knowledge. And even though I do pay, people do pay for that course, it's probably the cheapest one because I really do want to keep it open, keep it affordable, accessible to as many people as possible so they can grow their own food. And then we have our flower focused ones, which again are more like just for fun. And so we have our bouquet arrangement classes, and they tend to be focused depending on the season on dahlias and peonies and whatever flowers most abundant in that season. We also have a pumpkin centerpiece piece class, which is so fun because you get to carve pumpkins and then fill it with flowers. It's like an amazing way to end the season. And then this year, I want to add some more holistic ones, partner up with some other small businesses, do yoga in the garden. Again, that one wouldn't necessarily be working with flowers, but more just taking advantage of that space that we have, making it nice and relaxing. I'd like to work with a painter, do some, floral painting, maybe even some scent therapy with flowers, things like that, that really address, so that when you look at the body of our workshops, it addresses the holistic whole being of the person, the body, the mind, the soul.
That sounds beautiful. For people who are listening, what community do you live in if someone happens to live nearby?
Oh, yes. So I'm actually in Deep River, Ontario. So we're in the Ottawa Valley. So right smack dab between North Bay and Ottawa, like 2 hours from each.
Got it. So probably a couple hours from me, but for the right workshop, I'm sure I can make it happen.
Yeah, actually, someone drove from Toronto to one of our workshops. The morning of, they left, I think, at 4 a.m. in the morning to come for the farm to fork brunch. And then they left that very day. It was such an honor that they drove all that way to attend.
So, getting back around to flower arranging, is there a reason that dahlias and ranunculus are the best? I'm going to go with it.
I think objectively,
They're just cheery.
yeah, I know. I don't know. It's funny because I think some people might disagree with that conclusion. But I think the appeal of ranunculus is just like that, just the overlapping intricacies of the petals, just like in that little that blossom, just how many layers of petals there are, each distinct but almost innumerable. There's something so fascinating about the eye that just pulls you in, almost attempting to count and see all the layers and try and differentiate between them, but then getting lost in them because there's just like an infinite amount of them. I think that's what makes ranunculus just, I call ranunculus the queen of spring for that reason. And then dahlias are just a phenomenon of nature, like that geometric ball. There's absolutely no flower that consulted, mathematicians before it was created the way dahlias do. It doesn't seem like something of nature. It seems like something that someone drew with a calculator and, like a ruler, and then put it on a stem. It's just so intricate in the way that those balls look. I think that there's just nothing like them. I think that's why it's just so intriguing. I think naturally our brains do gravitate towards those things that have that kind of mathematical look to them. And dahlias are definitely one of those.
I think, too, to me, part of the beauty of having them together is that one is so just explosive the way ranunculus are. And peonies are the same way, that they're like a tiny little golf ball sort of thing, and then they just explode, where dahlias are a relatively similar shape overall, but the petals are so geometric, and that geometry against the color of dahlias is always so just incredible. And anyone who thinks that ranunculus and dahlias aren't the best flowers is wrong, and you can fight me over it.
Yeah. I think though between the two flowers, you might have half the population on your side. So
Yeah. First barnyard language cage match.
yeah, the thing with dahlias too is they come in such a range of colors. They are so nuanced. Like there's peach, but then there's like peach pink and peach yellow and peach with yellow inner petals, and then peach with a little glow. Like there's just so much nuance in their colors. Right now, there's kind of a, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the tulip bubble of like 1808 or something like that. Back in the day, there was a tulip craze, and people were buying tulip bulbs for like thousands of dollars. It was ridiculous. We're currently in a dahlia tuber craze where people are buying tubers for hundreds of dollars. It's insane. Whenever there's a tuber sale online, everything goes within a minute. It's wild, and it's because just the breeding of dahlias has ramped up. And there's just so much nuance in the colors. It's you even though this is another peach, it's like a slightly different peach that I absolutely must have.
As a I hate to say fiber artist, but a aficionado of things with slight differences that are not visible to many people, as many collectors are. My husband is the same way about tractors. Um, it can be very hard to explain to outsiders why this one is different than that one, but I fully support anyone who can still pay their bills and meet their financial obligations, and then you should just do what you want, because I might not see any difference between those two tubers, but if you do, have at it.
Yeah, you buy them. I mean, unless one of them is $50 and the other's five, then maybe we might want to pass.
So you're working also with couples who are getting married and looking for wedding flowers. But you're also growing all of those flowers. And so how do you work with clients in terms of if they have a specific vision for what they want their wedding bouquet to look like, but then the time comes and maybe those flowers aren't quite ready yet, or those types of things. So do you take a more fluid approach to wedding flower planning, or how does that work?
Yeah, so one of the things that I learned very early on, I made the mistake of guaranteeing very specific flowers, right down to like the specific names of dahlias. So it wasn't even like I said, we're going to use dahlias ranunculus. No, I was like, we're going to use Biancos fufumato ranunculus. We're going to use Lark's Ebb dahlias. That was a terrible mistake because when the time came, I accidentally froze the flowers and I was scrambling because I'd harvested all of those specific flowers for this particular wedding. Luckily, the bride was very, very, it was a DIY wedding, so she was making her own bouquets and she was very relaxed. But it was a very terrifying experience for me, and I never, ever, ever forgot it. And so I never guarantee flowers. What I ask for from brides is a color palette. And so they usually send me inspiration photos, and from those photos, I can kind of see their style. They tend to send similar styles in terms of like, if it's like garden style or wildflower or romantic, they tend to stay in that same kind of like style in terms of the vibe. But then you can see the color palette and how they want. Sometimes it's a lot of editing too in the images, the photographers, but you can kind of see what about each picture inspires them or is pulling them in this particular direction so that I can achieve the feeling of those pictures in the bouquet. So we're not necessarily mimicking the flowers. We're going to copy the palette. The palette for sure is going to be what they want, but the feel, the vibe, the emotion it evokes is what I'm copying, is what we're going to be replicating, so that it gives me a little bit more flexibility to use whatever's in season. And I just need to make sure that I match the palette. That's the only restraint that I give myself, that I match the movement of the bouquet. Maybe there might be something spilling out here. Maybe it might be cascading. We want to recreate that. And so the brides that I've gotten so far, they've been very, very open, and I'm also very transparent. That I don't guarantee flowers. There was one bride, for example, that asked me if I could tell her, what flowers I'd be using, and maybe if I could send her some pictures ahead of time. And I said I cannot do that because once the week of your wedding comes, that's when I go into the garden. That's when I look at your. I would have already planned her wedding, mind you, in terms of what I'm going to grow, but as much planning as I do, that week may come and that thing is not blooming. So I have planned some backups, but I don't want to give you this list of flowers and it doesn't end up being there, and I alter expectations. So they do have to put a little bit of faith in me. And in lieu, I try and share as many pictures as possible on our website so they can see the kind of work that they can expect from me. And for the most part, I've had very, very positive results with that method.
That makes a lot of sense when, I mean, we all know that, any season can be different, right? In terms of how warm it is, or, if you get rain or not, or what's opening up, and what's doing well in a certain season. You talked about that time where you froze some flowers. If someone is trying to preserve some flowers and and not hurt them, what are your tips for making flowers last a little bit longer, or hold on to them so that you can make something beautiful out of them?
Yeah, so if we're getting into the kind of preserving realm, there's so many different ways. I dry a lot of flowers, so just your conventional hanging upside down to dry. Sometimes, depending on the flower, you can actually set them in a vase. Just put a little bit of water in there. Once the water is finished, then you leave it, and it'll just kind of naturally dry on its own in that position. It's really nice for flowers that hang if you dry them in a vase, because then they'll keep that shape, that downward shape. Otherwise, when you hang them upside down, and they'll end up being straight up. There's other people who preserve in glycerin, so that'll kind of hold the structure a little bit better, makes the stems a little bit more flexible. When you air dry, it makes the stems a little bit more brittle. Or if you just want to do art with your blooms, you can also just pop the heads off and put them in. Oh boy, why am I forgetting the name all of a sudden? The name escaped me. It's like a sand substance that dries out the petals.
Is it like silica?
Yes, there we go. The name just popped out of my head. Silica gel, and it dries it very nicely in a couple of weeks. But if you're looking to just keep your fresh flowers, looking as good as possible for as long as possible, I recommend just changing out the water frequently. Cut the stems each time you change the water. Make sure you don't put them near any fruits because they tend to make the flowers die quicker. And if you can, and whenever you can, choose locally grown, because I do none of the things that I just said. I never change the water when I bring flowers in, and they just last forever. I always just forget about the flowers, and a week later I'm like, oh, they're hanging on. And it's funny because I always take note of which flowers are still living. I'm like, okay, that one we definitely should grow again, because seems to thrive on neglect, no water, and
Yeah,
no attention.
can put that in a bouquet and it'll last all day long with no water on it, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I have to say, looking at your social media and how gorgeous your bouquets are, and as someone who lives in a place where we have local florists, and unfortunately, I think the stereotype is very wrist corsage. What are those horrible little flowers that everybody makes fun of?
We don't need to degrade any flower here.
The carnations.
Oh
Yeah,
yes.
sorry. The dyed carnations, roses from the gas station, like that's the area I live in. And I have to say that the florist who did the flowers for our wedding didn't really have anything on display like I wanted, but I was like, we have to have flowers. I can't deal with like the DIY situation. Like, can't be that bad. She absolutely hit it out of the park. And that revelation to me about what a difference it makes to find someone who A knows what they're doing and B has just kind of been given free reign to just like I gave her, I don't know, 4 pictures from Pinterest and was like, something like this, here's the budget, have at it. And she absolutely nailed it. And I feel kind of bad for how judgy I had been about florists because I think a lot of times people say, I want a corsage and it needs to be just like this and it needs this and this and this. And, like, if people are creative, let them be creative. Don't.
Yeah, and you know what? I have to say, so there was one wedding that was I did have some challenges with. The outcome, the bride didn't I don't think they were 100% happy with it. And that was the one wedding where she was very specific about very specific things. And so I was confined to a very specific mold. And then one of the weddings where the bride was like, do whatever. She was like, just stay away from these colors. That's it. Do whatever you want. That was the best wedding that I'd ever done. She messaged me. She said, I don't know how you did this, but this bouquet fit me, my personality, everything about me so perfectly. And it's just the difference of letting that creative person be who they are. Obviously, giving them some guidance in terms of what you like and don't like, but not confining them so much that they cannot actually do what they can do. You'll see such a difference. You'll see such a difference in the outcome.
So, what are your top 3 tips for? I love flowers. I can grow decent flowers. I can cut them, obviously. And then I bring them in, and nobody's going to hire me to make a bouquet for any reason ever, probably. Like, I would end up paying them to take my flowers away. Um, how do we make arrangements that aren't as bad as we might do on our own?
So when I do the bouquet workshops, I notice something that's common with a lot of people. We the flowers are so beautiful, so you just grab everything because it's just so beautiful, right? And you just put them all together, and you hope all that beauty will combine into this beautiful thing. But then you do, and it's like, oh no, this doesn't look the way that I imagined. And I think it's because sometimes we are so overwhelmed by the beauty of all the flowers that we're not thinking about how they might pair together with one another. So I always like to instruct the attendees of our workshop to always pick a color palette. If you pick a color palette, pretty much everything you do after, it almost doesn't matter. It'll look intentional, even if you just do throw things together, as long as they're all within a color palette. People will think that you actually, put some actual work into this. So I look at a color wheel, for example, literally Google a color wheel, you pick one color, and then either go with the 2 colors beside it or stay with that color and pick a few shade ranges in that color. So that's a monochromatic. Or pick the color, pick the one opposite of it. And if you follow those rules and you force yourself to stay within that range, doesn't matter what you pick up, you'll find that it does tend to come together on its own for the most part. And then I do recommend, a large group of flowers can look good on its own. Just like just a vase of dahlias can look absolutely stunning. But if you want to make something that looks a little bit more intentional, I say pick a flower from each group. So after you've picked your color palette, I like to go around sometimes. Like for example, dahlias. They tend to have a couple shades in one dahlia. So I'll take that dahlia and actually walk around with that dahlia and pick other flowers that work within that shade range. So maybe I have a pink dahlia that has some lighter pink tones and then some mauve, some purple. So I'm going to stay within that the dahlia's given me a color palette to work with. I'm going to stay within it. Make sure I pick my purple flowers, some pinks, and then you'll see it coming together very nicely. And as I'm picking, I want to make sure I have one category, one flower from a focal category. So your focals are going to be the big flowers, the showstoppers, sunflowers, peonies, dahlias. Those are your focals. They take the attention. But then you also need fillers to fill the gaps because you can't just have just an arrangement with just one thing. It's overwhelming. So a filler can be anything like Queen Anne's lace, chamomile or feverfew. Some other common ones. Yarrow is a wonderful filler. I like hydrangeas as a filler too. So that's just anything that really is just going to fill the gaps of your bouquet. I like to keep them neutral, or again, follow the palette of that flower that you've chosen or the palette you picked. And then we need some greenery in there. Greenery just adds that nice natural look to it. And then a spike flower. So that's anything that's tall. So foxgloves, delphinium, larkspur, anything that kind of stretches, kind of gives the arrangement a little bit of a dynamic look. So if you get flowers from each of those categories, stay within your color palette, don't pick too many flowers within that category. If you're going to pick yarrow and Queen Anne's lace, try and just stick to those two. Don't pick a little bit of every filler that you have. You want some repetition in your bouquet. And then lastly, the vase that you choose, I like the ones that are kind of like they have like a narrow neck, and then they come out at the bottom. That way you have a natural structure to actually hold those stems right at the neck, but then the bottom is wider, so then it gives the stems a little bit of a way to kind of open up at the bottom. It holds in your arrangement, so it's not just flopping all over the place. And it makes it a little bit easier for you to throw stems in. And you could literally, with just those 3 tips, throw stems in. You might have to adjust the height as you go, depending on the flower. And you'll find yourself really happy with what you end up creating. It's not going to be a masterpiece, but it's going to be good enough.
I have to say, I love on your social media, I came across where you had posted pictures from like 4 years of learning about flower arrangement and getting to see that evolution from, I think the first year was like a lot of colors and a lot of flowers. And like, I'm a total maximalist, so I'm here for that. But seeing the growth of really letting particular flowers shine and really letting, because unfortunately, when you just grab everything, nothing stands out. Where, letting a few of them really show off is so much nicer. So I think the key here is for some of us to only plant flowers in one color palette, maybe, because maybe that will help keep me in line a little better.
Yeah, I think you can never go wrong with orange, pinks, and purples. I feel like those are 3 colors that, especially if you play with the different shades, lighter, darker, you can do so much with those. And you'll impress yourself with some of the arrangements that you end up making. If you don't want to end up just picking all the colors and just throwing it all together.
Okay, so Arlene and I both married into families that have been on the same property for generations. My kids are the 5th generation on this farm. I think, Arlene, yours are 6th or 7th generations. So you're from a military family, and I'm wondering what your connection to the land is like with potentially moving more frequently and how you look at that. And I imagine that urban gardening, especially using neighbors' properties, um, comes with some different restrictions and potentials than.
Yeah, so that's a big question because we're actually possibly facing, I think by the time this episode comes out, we may have already have found out if we will be getting posted or not. um but yeah, that was I remember my neighbor when I started the garden. She's an older lady, she's retired. She just kept on asking me, so what are you gonna do when you guys move? And I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, what am I going to have in my yard when if you
Yeah, I know. Yeah. What are you gonna give away? I'll take those peonies. Yeah, she'd asked me pretty frequently too, and I was like, I don't know what you're implying here, but maybe she was saying, she was trying to maybe nicely say, take it easy. You're gonna have to, leave. But I didn't at all. I didn't take it easy. I went harder. In fact, I was like, if I by the time I started the gardens, we were here for about a year, and I thought, if we end up staying here even 3 years, 3 years later, if I look back and I hadn't started the garden, I would feel like what a waste of 3 years. If we end up staying for 5 years, even more of a waste. I could have done so much in those 5 years. And so I just said, screw it. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to plant it. I was hesitant to put in certain perennials like peonies and stuff. After a certain point, I was like, screw it. I'll dig them up and take them with me. Or I'll give them away or whatever the case is. I'm more than likely dig them up and take them with me, with the way I am, and start all over somewhere else. But that's kind of where the name Re.Planted came from. I was thinking that if we have to uproot ourselves and relocate, am I going to allow myself to replant, to reroot? I absolutely must. I must let myself. And so I said to myself, um, I'm going to plant anyways. I'm going to invest anyways. I'm going to invest in those peonies. I'm going to invest in a cooler. There were things that I invested with mobility in mind. So, for example, our cooler, a lot of people have a walk-in fridge. It's stationary. It's in a building. Ours, we converted a trailer into a cooler, so we can take that with us. And so there's some things that I did invest in with that in mind. And then other things that I said, okay, maybe this one I might lose out on, but or this one I might never get. It might never get to maturity while I'm here. But if someone didn't plant that apple tree, on maybe a property that might end up on 30 or 40 years ago for fear that they might die or move and they'll never enjoy its fruits, then I wouldn't get to enjoy it. And so I felt like even if I'm not enjoying, I'm passing that on to someone else. And I think that's going to come around. It's going to come back around to me. That next property that I go to, there's going to be that established peony field. Please, 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 Lord, this is a prayer. And it's going to be there for me. And it's going to, and I would have inherited someone else's work. And so I think that if we're not careful, especially as military families, you can kind of find yourself in this constant state of limbo where you never allow yourself to really take root and settle anywhere. And then you'll look back on your life and realize you just never, there's been so much opportunities where you were just in this state of waiting, waiting, just constantly waiting till you get here, waiting to move, or not really allowing yourself to settle and take root. And so I decided that I didn't want to look back and regret. Regret for me is harder to deal with than fear of not seeing this to maturity. I hate to look back and wish like what could have been. And so I decided to do it. And there's a possibility that we may not get posted. And I will be so happy that I planted those peonies 3 years ago because now they're going to be blooming for me this year. Had I said, oh, I don't know, we might move, let's not put those peonies, 3-4 years later, I would have been like, oh, what a waste. I could have had peonies in here and been harvesting on them, for the last couple of years. So yeah, it's a weird predicament to be in, but it somewhat forces you to um, kind of be present, but also let go of all the things that you own because there's this possibility that you'll have to leave it all behind, and start all over. So it's definitely not for the faint of heart. And it's taken me a while to get here. I wasn't always like this. I was very resistant to change, actually, once upon a time.
I think that's a really good way of looking at things, no matter where you are, right? If you don't do it now, 5 years from now, are you going to look back and be like, oh, I'm really glad I didn't invest in myself, or I'm really glad I didn't do that thing? Or are you going to look back and say, why didn't I do it then? I still want to do that thing. And I would have been 5 years ahead, right? If I had just believed in myself, or if I'd made the investment, or I'd taken the time, whatever it is, whatever it requires, if you have something that you're passionate about, you know, there are always going to be excuses and reasons why to convince yourself why you shouldn't do it. But yeah, just go ahead and jump in and then, start working towards the goal rather than waiting for the perfect time.
I think that's such a great reminder too, because if you don't plant the peonies in 5 years, you definitely will not have peonies.
Yeah, that's the guarantee. Yeah, don't plant the thing, you won't have it. Yeah.
You might have them, I mean, barring some like weird, I don't know, peony related guerrilla gardening situation, you're not going to have peonies.
Some kind of peony specific grub that takes in you.
Well, no, I mean that peonies would show up without you participating in their arrival.
Podcasts are free to listen to, but they aren't free to create. Katie and I would appreciate your support as we work to build the Barnyard Language community.
Patreon is an easy way for you to make a contribution that goes directly to making the show. As a member of our Patreon community, you get to watch the video version of our weekly updates, complete with questionable hairstyles and clutter. With 3 levels of support, you can choose a tier that works for you.
Keep the podcast going by becoming a patron today at patreon.com/barnyardlanguage.
So we've talked a lot about flowers, but I also want to get in a few of our usual parenting questions. And so we often end up asking our guests about the time where they first became a parent, because it's such a transition point for, well, everything, it feels like. So when you reflect on that time, I guess it was 6 years ago for you, when you first became a mother, what stands out to you about that time in your life?
Oh yeah, I remember probably the biggest shock to me was just like, oh my goodness, I don't think I'm ever gonna sleep again. Like just that moment of realizing, oh, so apparently mothers they don't sleep.
Yeah, that's not a thing we do. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that was hard for me actually. It seems like a very small thing. I guess I just didn't think about it. Just the interruptions in sleep. That was really, really hard for me to manage. It kind of impacted the way the way the day would go. I was just so tired, and that exhaustion, like me being inebriated, me being drunk, and me being exhausted and sleep deprived. Those two people are the same people. They both function exactly the same, and for a very long time, that's how I lived. I was just constantly exhausted, and I'm just not productive at all when I'm tired. I can't think straight. And then, just as a mother, naturally, you have to be able to multitask. You know, you have this to do and that to do, and then you got to think ahead about certain things. And so your attention is divided. And I very much was used to, hyper focusing on one thing at a time and getting that thing done. And so when you combine the two, being having my attention divided and having so many multiple urgent priorities that need to be taken care of and being sleep deprived, I did really struggle with just the management of the house and myself. And I was I made sure my child was changed and fed and everything, but I didn't always eat. And the house wasn't always clean. And I mean, the house still isn't clean. But I'm okay with it now.
But the flower beds look great.
Yeah, well, you know what? Back then, when I first had Josiah, I didn't have any gardens, and I don't know how I could have back then. But in the summers, yeah, don't come in my house. The gardens are immaculate, not the house. But I think probably the biggest thing too is now I was starting to think like way ahead of time, like what do I want the next generation to learn and to have, and what do I want my children to be, and then also reconciling some of like my own childhood trauma and some of the experiences that I went through with my parents, and just contemplating like now how to like undo that trauma and like not repeat those mistakes, and being in this situation now where I see that okay, I'm the parent now, and I only know one way, and this way I didn't like, so how do I be different, how do I do it differently, and just kind of that existential crisis of who am I and who do I want to be and how do I get there, and how can I be an example, and set the foundation for the future. And so I really took a lot of weight, personal responsibility in being a parent, and just how much of an impact I can have on my children and the next generation. And sometimes that puts a lot of pressure. It's very stressful, but I've learned to take it day by day. Children are so forgiving and so what's the word, forgiving, I guess, is just the best word. When you make mistakes, as long as you're humble, you can pick back up and say, okay, we're not going to do that again. I didn't like the way I handled that, let's try it differently. They're with you on the new path. They're with you as you mold and change. And so yeah, there's just that's really just, it had quite that impact on me in terms of like the structure of how I live, and also just the forward thinking, that future minded.
I think it can be such a trip to realize that you can just parent differently than what you grew up with. That you can just, I think a lot of families grew up with never apologizing to children because they're children. Why would you? And I mean, like 2 days ago, I made a mistake in my parenting. I overreacted and didn't really think through the background of the situation we were in. And the next morning, I was able to go to my daughter and say, I overreacted. Like, you were doing a thing. Don't get me wrong, there was a problem, but I didn't handle it well. How can we address this in a more reasonable way? And realizing what a difference it makes to society if we raise children who are willing to admit when they were wrong and to work that out with other people rather than just, digging their feet in harder about it. But it's just such a trip that you can just do it differently.
And it goes back to what you're saying about when we were talking about courses and wanting to learn from someone who will admit their mistakes. It makes your children much more willing to take your advice and listen to you, hopefully, because you were willing to say, hey, yeah, I think I need to check that wasn't the right thing to do.
Or even as a parent, if I have some teenagers now, hopefully that when they do make mistakes, because they're going to, if they've seen you apologize, that they're also willing to admit and say, I made a mistake and I might need some help here. Like I messed up, but to hopefully not be afraid to then come to us when they inevitably do make, bad choices, because we all do, or, that something has gone wrong. We hope that by showing them that we're real humans, that that they're also allowed to be real humans and can ask for help when they need it.
I think that's probably another thing too that I realized growing up, and I had a lot of animosity towards my mom specifically, but when I had kids, and there were certain things that were put into perspective, and I realized actually she is a human being.
That is also a trip.
Yeah, she like, as much as these things hurt me, and it had this impact on me, she too is just a human being. And that was something that sunk in. That's like, oh my gosh, she's actually a real person. you know
Yeah. Who probably had her own childhood traumas that were coming back around when she had her own kids. Yeah. I hear that too. So I know that, like farming, parenting is different for every family. So we talked a little bit before about weeding as a family activity, but how do you make farming and work and childcare and family life all work out somehow?
Most days, something does fall by the wayside. Sometimes we just have toast for dinner. And we keep things super simple in terms of meals. It's funny because I have all these gardens, I grow all this food, and in the summer I barely really even have time to eat it. I don't have time to do a whole lot with those veggies, so I actually end up eating more of it in the winter because that's when I have time to make all the fancy dishes. One of the things that my kids, they are always outside with me in the gardens. That's one of the advantages of being kind of in this urban area. Their friends from school are across the street. They live across the street, so at some point they're all riding their bikes together on the block. And it's easy to see them because it's such a quiet neighborhood and it's safe. So they'll ride their bikes for hours and hours. We'll come in for lunch, then they'll come in, roam a little bit, do bubbles. Maybe I'll set up the pool in the backyard, but they're always outside. They're rarely, maybe on, like, when we have those heat waves where it's just so hot, but I absolutely need to be outside. I won't let them come out with me, just too much. Then they'll be inside, and then I'll pull out my tool. I like to use YouTube as like the tool of last resort. Okay, it's too hot to be outside, so we will watch a show for an hour. We'll watch a movie. But for the most part, they're always with me. I take them with me everywhere on deliveries. And I've actually always admired that. Like, I never had that opportunity to do that. My mom had a much more traditional job where she'd go to work and I'd go to school. But just, I always admired people who could just kind of sit alongside and watch their parents work, and they kind of took some of that passion on and learned some of that skill. If their parents had a job that allowed them to work from home, maybe carpentry or mechanic or whatever, if they had hobbies, and so I like them to see what I'm doing. I like them to have a role, have a part. I like them to ask me what this flower is called, and, oh, look, are we going to plant tulips again next year? Stuff like that. I like them to be involved. They do help me in some respects, and actually they're very, very helpful. And I think about it sometimes. I don't know what I actually would do certain days without their help, because of just how much they are able to, even if it's just like, I forgot my water bottle over here, can you go grab it for me, saving me that little bit of time. So I try and integrate them in everything as much as possible. And I cut myself some slack, honestly. The house in the summer, it's not going to be clean. There's going to be some spot cleaning done. We're going to get the dishes done. The bathroom might get cleaned maybe this month. But I actually have now been setting aside money to actually just pay someone to just come and clean, so that I don't have that pressure on myself, because it's also hard for me to relax in an environment where things are a mess, but then I also don't have the time to clean. So I've just been saying, okay, you know what? I'm not making millions of dollars, but I am going to set aside $200 and get someone to come on a weekend and just get this place to a state where at least we can maintain it for a week and I have some peace of mind. So cutting myself some slack, and learning how to make some quick meals, quick and easy meals is key.
Toast is a great meal option. I love that one.
I honestly could eat bread because I make my own bread, sourdough with butter. I could live off of that. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and I would not complain. I would just be so happy.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of kids' favorite meals too. I mean, I've got one who basically lives on bread and cheese anyway, so it all works out.
Yeah, the simplest of meals are the favorite.
So feel like you kind of already answered it, but what's your favorite thing about raising kids with a connection to the land?
I just love their just they have this approach. When I first started, I had this kind of like naive inquisitional attitude towards everything. Oh, this wonderment. Not to say I've lost that, but I have kind of filled in a lot of those knowledge blanks. But it's nice to see that they still have that, and to share. Why does the bee have what is on the bee's legs? All those yellow stuff, and I can explain that it's the pollen, and just I enjoy that those kind of questions. That's just I never even looked at that flower before. I didn't even notice that it was doing that. And Josiah did notice, and now he's asking me about it. Now we can talk about it together. And they notice things that I don't, because they're shorter than me, so they have a different perspective, and they see the garden from a different way. And it's nice that they kind of bring me into that world sometimes to see what I miss. And honestly, they really are so helpful. It's taught them how to work together, the two of them, and how to feel like what they do actually has an impact on the world and my work. And I always let them know. I always thank them, and I always show them their progress. For example, they always help me plant tulips, and then we get to watch those tulips bloom. And as we're watching them, I tell them, remember when you're planting this, this is now what's happening. It's blooming, and thank you for helping me, and now we can enjoy these flowers.
So my kids are just a little bit older than yours. What's your biggest parenting struggle these days?
You know what? Um, I have to say, I have no struggles. I'm kidding. um, the biggest, it's funny. Before, when they weren't in school, yeah, I found it harder. Now they're both in school. So in September, the youngest went to school, and I'm finding it much easier. Not that they are easier children, not that they don't, had tantrums and all that, but just those 6 hours that I have to like catch up. Even if it's literally do nothing, the house is still a mess. I did nothing all day, and just to myself to kind of recoup. I'm able to like to manage so much better the tantrums and the this one left their sock over here. Whereas I found before they went to school, I was like always on edge, always stressed out. I just felt so overwhelmed all the time. I just felt like I was constantly being fed information and wasn't able to manage, dissect. But now I have that time to actually piece things out. And so I find that it's actually not so challenging. There are challenges of being a parent. They have their quirks and behavioral issues sometimes, but I'm finding that I'm having an easier time to manage them now because they're in school, and I have that time to collect myself and my thoughts so that I can tackle the weekends and the evenings and the mornings with them, even if they're being so slow in the mornings or they're not eating their dinner. It's I'm handling it a little bit differently because I have a little bit more time during the day.
I was a stay-at-home parent with my kids until, excuse me, they started school, and there is something magical about realizing that not being with your kids 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, um, means that you actually are a human again. On your own, right? And not always feeling like you're that the other shoe's about to drop, that someone is going to need something, or that they're, I mean, the phone can still ring and they might need to pick up from school for whatever reason, but when I finally got to that point of having a few uninterrupted hours, yeah, it just feels like your brain can work better. But go figure. That there's no one else in our life that we would spend that much time with for that many years and think that was that's just normal, right?
Yeah, the we don't have grandparents nearby. My husband's parents have passed, so we don't really have much of a support network, someone to take the kids for a couple hours. But I do believe that's how probably the previous generations did it, with that strong extended family network of being able to take the kids for a couple hours. It makes such a difference, such a difference.
Hmm. So this one is always a tricky question to ask because sometimes it feels like we don't want to give advice if people aren't asking us, but I'm asking, so you can give it to me. Do you have a piece of parenting advice that you learned along the way or that someone shared with you that you would want to share with another farm parent?
I would say humility is really important. I think humility to know that you are human and will make mistakes, um, to admit those mistakes, to apologize or backtrack, to hear maybe when your partner say, "Hey, I don't think the way you handled that was the greatest. Maybe you could have done that a little bit better." And then to also know that, to extend that humility to the past generation, maybe the mistakes that they made, to know that they were also just human, and so um, we need to find a way to repair some of those things and not repeat it. I think that's key. I think um, with humility in any relationship, whether it's parent, child, partner, friends, family, I think it's so key to have that willingness to hear someone out, someone's perspective, someone's opinion about you, and also cutting yourself a little bit of slack. You can't be everything to everyone, it's not possible. When you drop the ball in some areas, when you do make a mistake, when you're not perfect, which you always will not be, you never will be perfect, it's because you're very much human. And that's what makes humans human, just the fact that we're not perfect. And so, not being so hard on yourself. I find that I tend to beat myself up about certain things that I wish I'd done differently. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. But tomorrow's a new day. You can fix that tomorrow. You can change that tomorrow. The next time you can do better.
Thank you. I love that.
So, we ask all of our guests if you were going to dominate a category at the county fair, what would it be? And categories can be real or made up to ensure that you win.
Oh my goodness. I saw that question and I was like, how do I even answer this? Um, I'd say the person who took the most unexpected path in life. Because if you would have seen me in high school and university, it seemed like there was a very specific path that I was going to take. I was going to work corporate. I was going to be in downtown Toronto, suit and tie. Well, not a suit and tie, but whatever, briefcase, whatever, the whole 9 yards. And then I remember I went to my high school reunion a couple years ago, or 2 or 3 years ago, and I was like, what am I going to tell people when they ask me what I do? Because I don't know if I should tell them the truth or should I just make something up because this is just too complicated to
They're
explain.
they're not going to believe you even if you tell them the truth.
Yeah, it's just so random and so unexpected. It's not what at all what anyone thought I would do. I was like, I think third highest in my class in terms of grades. I went into an honors program. Like, really, this is not what I anyone would have expected. And then I went there, and funny enough, they were the ones asking me. So I saw on Facebook that you run a farm. Like, what is this? What's happening? How did you get into it? It's so cool. And I was like, what? You think it's okay? Sure. Yeah, I'll tell you more about it. But it was just so unexpected in terms of like where I would have gone in life. Even my mom sometimes is like, I'd have no idea how you ended up. I would have never thought that this is something you'd end up doing. I don't know where you learned this. I don't know what possessed you to go in this direction. She's saying it in a positive way in terms of she's happy for me, but she just never would have expected that this is where I would have gone. So
And see, I was just thinking you were going to go floral arranging, but yeah, I like that too.
yeah, no.
You don't know who your competition might be, right? So we'll go ahead and move into our usual cussing and discussing segment. If you're a listener and want to submit yours, you can use our speak pipe or our email, and both the links for those are in the show notes. Katie, what are you cussing and or discussing this week?
So, I work on tech professionally, full time, which means that generally I have, alerts and things pretty locked down. But during the recording of most of this episode, something has been beeping an alert at me. It is something on my end, and I don't know what it is. Everything is set to do not disturb. My phone is turned off. My computer's set to do not disturb. There's nothing else in here, and something is still beeping at me.
Something or someone really wants you to know about something that's going on.
And it is just irritating as hell. And I can't find anything. It's a computer notification. I know what it is, but I don't know where it's coming from. And I have closed every culprit that I can find, and it's still, of course, now it has stopped because
Yeah, sure.
we're
Because
wrapping,
their interview's almost done now. It's like, you don't need to know anymore.
but it's just really irritating. This is why I always keep everything silenced. Akos, what do you have?
Well, it is currently, I don't know what the Fahrenheit conversion is. It is currently -30 right now where I'm at, Celsius. And I don't even want to pick my kids up from school. I almost want to abandon them there because it's that cold.
Maybe someone else could bring them home. They can figure it out.
I know, right? And what's so annoying is the sun is so bright. It's been such a gloomy winter, but today of all days, the sun is just beckoning me to go out there. It's so deceptive.
Yeah, don't do it.
Don't do it. Don't. I did it this morning when I dropped them off at school. It was a lie. It's cold.
We don't live all that far apart, and I just walked out to the end of the driveway to put my youngest on the bus, and it's that like where your nose hairs freeze and your eyelashes start to stick together. So yeah,
Immediately, yeah.
not worth it for sure.
It's very annoying that the sun is so bright and beautiful today on one of probably the coldest days of the year, and it tends to usually be like that on winter days, on these cold days.
Sit by the window, enjoy the sun like a cat.
Yeah. I actually am in right by the window, and I really it's like a whisper. Come out, come outside. It's lovely here.
Lies.
It's like one of those fairy tales about like the fairies whispering and like playing music so that you'll follow them into the swamp and they'll steal you.
Yeah, into death. Yeah, pretty much.
Keep dancing.
Arlene, what do you have to cuss and discuss today?
So mine is also semi-winter related. So I think it was probably a month ago now, I slipped on the ice, which happens, and fell fairly hard and didn't break anything as far as I know. But still, like, I don't know if it's because I'm in my 40s or if this is just how bodies work, but I will every once in a while think I can put my elbow on the table now, like it's no big deal. And this shock will go up through my arm from the spot where I fell on the ice. And I just kind of thought that I'd be over it by now, but it still just reminds me every now and then that no, that spot still hurts. And you're just going to have to live with that for maybe the rest of the winter. I don't know, but yeah, the dangers of winter living.
I find those little aches and pains, they tend to work themselves out in the summer.
Yeah, that's
Once
right.
the summer comes, they just work themselves out.
Yeah, I'll get over it eventually. So we want to thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to find you online, see pictures of beautiful flowers now that it's winter and they want to think about spring, where should they find you on the internet?
Yeah, we are Re.Planted Farm everywhere. So Re.Planted Farm. And on Facebook, Instagram, our website, replantedfarm.ca, and where else? That's it. If you want to see, we do have a couple YouTube videos from early on. Nothing updated, nothing new, but kind of I show the process of us starting our gardens using the no-dig method, how we converted the lawns. At least that I got recorded 4 years ago, and that's it. But if you're kind of curious to see how we started, and maybe you're interested in doing something like that, even just for a home garden, we do have a video on YouTube, again, Re.Planted Urban Farm, I believe, on YouTube.
Thank you so much. It was great to meet you and to talk about something sunny and beautiful today.
Yes, it was an absolute pleasure, and thank you guys for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Barnyard Language. If you enjoy the show, please support us on Patreon with a donation.
Big thanks go out to our show editor, Krista Paffrath at the Rural Podcast Network.
Please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen and follow the show so you never miss an episode.
If you want to connect with other farming families, join the private Barnyard Language Facebook group.
We are always in search of future guests for the podcast. If you or someone you know would like to chat with us, get in touch.